edition of Dr. Bickmore's Why Wednesday in Conversation. And today my guest is Kelly Milner Halls. And Kelly, we've been on the edges of meeting each other for quite a few years, actually. And it's great to have you as a guest to Dr. Bickmore's Why Wednesday.
We're old friends who've never met.
And we're rendering that through Zoom, as so much has done in the world in the last 4 or 5 years. You know, I have friends that I've edited 3 books with, and we never met in person to do any of that work. You know, we met at conferences, we started the project, and then COVID hit, and we did the project completely on Zoom. Well, people in young adult literature may not know you as well as they probably should, although you have middle grade things to your record that we're talking about. But you are primarily a writer of elementary nonfiction. And today, during this discussion, I'd like to cover 3 things. I want to talk about how you became a writer and what kind of writing you did, and then what your elementary work consists of, and then how you think your work appeals to middle grades readers. So we'll kind of go there. So tell me about the inspiration to be a writer.
Well, when I was in 3rd grade, I was a bouncy behavior problem. I was a nice kid, but I was a bouncy kid. And I had a teacher named Miss Grayson. And Miss Grayson was the first teacher in 3rd grade who actually saw that bounciness as potential rather than just a difficulty. So we were writing in our journals one day, and she came to me and said, "Kelly." And I said, "What?" Because I thought, what have I done now? And she said, "You're a really good writer." And I said, "What? This is fun. I like this better than settle down, sit down, don't you have something to do?" So Miss Grayson did that. And then Miss Grayson read a book that changed my life. She read it out loud, which I still love to this day. She read Charlotte's Web. Yeah. And I was Fern. I was outside more than I was inside. You know, I liked hanging out with boys. I was completely and immediately attached to that book. And that book taught me that the hard work that goes into reading fiction, in this case, actually had a payoff at the end, because she read it aloud and I got to hear it through her voice in my head. My mother had always read picture books to me. Dr. Seuss was the primary, and that was fun, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same hard work. So it was Miss Grayson who turned me on to being a writer and helped me understand that if you push yourself a little to read any book, fiction or nonfiction, that there is a payoff in the end. There is a value. So that was when I first started thinking about being a writer. Then in 6th grade, my English teacher, Mr. Phillips, these are the teachers you remember like yesterday.
Yeah, that's right.
He said, "You're a good writer." And I thought, what is this writer stuff? I don't get this. And then when I went to high school, I discovered high school journalism. And that was it. I had fallen in love. And that's where I met Andrew Smith. He and I both worked on the newspapers.
Yeah. And so did you see that as a career then? When you're doing it in high school, you thought, oh, I can get a job on a newspaper. You know, people don't think that now, right? They think of writing in online platforms, but the newspaper world has just disappeared, right?
It's dwindling. It is vanishing. I did. And at the time, you have to remember, I graduated in 1976, and that was just after Watergate.
Yeah.
And Woodward and Bernstein had turned the world upside down. And I thought, that is what I want to do. I want to catch the bad guys. But when I got into the real world of writing, I realized that bad guys have kids. And if you write an expose about Nixon, Nixon's family gets hurt. Mm-hmm. And I knew that it needed to be done, and I have absolute respect for it. But I also knew it wasn't going to be me, that I didn't have the heart to out somebody for something that they'd done that they might not be proud of. So for a while, I didn't write. For a while, I just kind of hung out. And then I had my kids, and I realized, someone writes for them. Yeah. And if I write for young readers, I don't have to write about the difficult things. I can write about the interesting things. So that's when I realized that's what I want to do. So I started with the magazines and newspapers because it was most like what I'd always done, what I'd studied in school.
Mhm.
And I wrote for the Chicago Tribune and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and a million newspapers. At the time, they had kids sections. And I also wrote for many, 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 many magazines. And I wrote about 1,000 articles in a 10-year period. And then there's a poet named Marilyn Singer, and she and I were friends. And
Huh.
she said, Kelly, I want to challenge you to stop writing for newspapers and magazines because they keep all rights. I want to challenge you to write books. And I'm so competitive that I said, challenge accepted, my friend. And that's when I started writing books for young readers. And it sort of overtook writing articles about the same time that newspapers started to
Dwindle some,
drop
yeah.
off the face of the planet.
Yeah. Well, and did you just start cold soliciting your articles to these magazines?
Yeah,
Wow.
I didn't even know there was such a thing as a writer's market. Because I'd been out of I'd done my schooling, and then I'd done my mothering. And then I thought, I need to do this. This is really what I want to do. And I did not realize there were market guides that could tell you what editors wanted, what particular
Yeah.
content.
So when you
And
started,
so I would just pick a magazine at the newsstand that I loved or in the library, and I would say, hey, I'd like to write this for you. And somewhere along the line, I figured out what a query letter was. I think I took a class from the Institute of Children's Literature, and I was such a greenie. I said, hey, what if I write my queries on bright neon paper? And the teacher's like, face plant. She said, no, 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 don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. And I think the major thing I got out of that class was how to write a query letter. And that's a query, for those who don't know, is rather than send in the work, you write to the newspaper or magazine editor and say, hey, listen, I'd love to write you an article about animal ghosts.
Mhm.
And it'll be about 400 words, and I can have it ready for you in a month. And they say, yes, I'd like to see it, or no, I wouldn't want to see it. But because 400 words is not very long, and because they didn't know my work, I would query them and include the text
Oh,
because I needed to prove myself before
yeah.
they threw the letter away. And that's what got my foot in the door. And little by little, when you start to get a reputation, then other editors find you. I wrote for a magazine called Guideposts for Kids, and I wrote an article about the Turkey Olympics. And the Chicago Tribune called me and said, well, we like your weird stuff. Can you write some weird stuff for us? And I said, absolutely. They said, we need a weird Halloween story. So I thought, and I wrote an article for them called Dead End Jobs. And it was about people who work with dead bodies.
Um,
And it was disgusting and interesting all in one. They could not resist it. It was absolutely perfect. So then they said, write us a weird Valentine's Day story. And I wrote about why we give hearts.
uh-huh.
It's a body part. Why do we do it? I'd always wondered. So a lot of what I do goes back to questions I had when I was that bouncy little kid.
Yeah.
And if somebody says, we need a Valentine's Day article, but we want it to be weird, I think, well, I always wondered why we give hearts.
Yeah.
So I go through the research, and that's what builds the story. And kids love weird stuff, and I love weird stuff. And with kids, I can do all the weird stuff I want because we're on the same page.
Yeah.
I'm old, I'm 66, but I never quite grew up.
Yeah, I love that because I'm thinking, I taught mainly high school age kids, and sometimes you can get more work from sophomores if you have them doing something elementary. Like, like we often, one of the things I
Absolutely.
would do at the end of the year is have them write alphabet books that we would send to first graders or kindergarten classes, right? And they had so much fun researching and coming up with a theme for an alphabet book, whether it was cars or sports figures or whatever they would do. And all of a sudden, they'd be researching more things because they were interested, and the writing level didn't seem threatening to them, right? So they were willing to say, "Oh, I can do that." So I love the stuff that you do that's weird. So, and you made that transition then by writing books. And did you find at some point it was hard to keep up writing articles for Highlights or Humpty Dumpty or whoever you're writing for versus keeping up with the books?
At first it was pretty easy to juggle because books are not a quick proposition. Even a picture book takes quite a bit of time to research, write, and produce. So there was time to do both. And my fancy dancy filing system were post-it notes all over my monitor to remind me this is due then and this is due then, and this is because I had to write 12 articles a month to make a living.
Yeah.
So I was juggling quite a bit, but eventually the books just took over. It was such a it was rewarding. I love writing short nonfiction too. It's fun because you have to figure out what's the most important piece, and you have to do it in 400 to 600 words, which is very short.
Yeah.
If you write book reviews, it's not that short. So book reviews are like 50 words in Book List, which I also wrote for. Yeah, that's how I met John Green. We both wrote for Book List at the same time.
Oh, how fun.
But anyway, the books eventually took over because it's just so, it feeds your soul to be able to dig a little deeper into the topic, and books allow you to do that. So when I first started writing books, I was writing for Guideposts for Kids, and they also had Guideposts for Teens. And my editor there, her name was Tanya Dean. And Tanya Dean left Guideposts for Teens to start a brand new publishing company called Darby Creek. And it was in Ohio. And she said, hey, listen, I have my fiction book for the first list, but I need a nonfiction book. Do you have anything good? And I had just interviewed a paleontologist about where kids can go and dig up fossils for the Chicago Tribune. And I said, well, this paleontologist, he said, he has a dinosaur mummy. What do you think about that? That's intriguing to me. And she said, yeah, develop that proposal, get it to me quick. And I think I only had like 12 weeks to write this particular title because it was sort of a sudden development. So I started and had it almost finished. And I had dinosaur mummies are mummies that have more than bones fossilized. They have soft tissue fossilized along with their bones. And it's super interesting and weird and gross and everything I love. And I love dinosaurs. I just always have. So I had it all done. I think I had 3 weeks left. And then the paleontologist that I had depended on for this dinosaur mummy, Leonardo, I was going to do it about Leonardo, who was a duckbill dinosaur, who was about 80% fossilized, including all of his internal organs.
Wow.
And I was going to make him the main story, and then I was going to have sidebars about different dinosaurs. One had a heart and one had lungs, and it was just to feed the Moore monster. So I have like 3 weeks left and I'm almost finished. I'm thinking, boy, this is going to be so great. And then the paleontologist called me and said, I have good news and bad news. And I said, well, give me the good news first. And he goes, Universal is going to give me $3 million for the rights to Leonardo. And I said, oh my gosh, what could be bad? And he said, I have to take away the picture book rights. And I said, no. I said, you understand our interviews belong to me now. You already signed them off. He goes, yeah, but the pictures belong to me. And I thought, oh no. And this was on a Friday. And I think, how am I going to tell Tanya? So I real quick decide, okay, each of these sidebars are going to be a chapter. And I had happened to find a newspaper reporter who took pictures of Leonardo before a clause was developed. You have to sign away your rights to share the photos. So he had 3 pictures of Leonardo. Mm-hmm. So I ended up doing that. It ended up actually being a better book. But the loveliness of being able to expand a topic,
yeah,
and to make it, a little broader. So because we all want to know a little more.
Yeah.
I mean, so that was why the books just won out.
Yeah. So
I still will, if I get asked to write magazine or newspaper nonfiction, I absolutely will do it. Now at this point I have time, but that was what happened.
Well, and I read on your website that you have a book that was in print for 18 years that's now going out of print.
Yes, Tales of the Cryptids.
18 years is a long time for a book to be in print, Kelly, right?
This book, it is a very long time. It's a very long time. And I got a letter this week saying, oh, we're going to take the hardcover out of print. And I thought, well, it's had a good run. And I said, can I have the rights? Because we'd like to spruce it up and re-release it. And she says, funny you should say that. We decided we're going to have a paperback, because all this time it's been hardcover, never paperback. Yeah. And I said, well, that's good. That's fine, because there are lots of kids that can afford a paperback that can't afford a $23 book. So it's win-win as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, Tales of the Cryptids, 18 years, and it's probably going to go on to be, I mean, it could go on to be 25 years with the paperback.
Yeah, paperback. And I'm sure because of that, that it exists. Have you ever done the search where you try to find out how many libraries it's in?
I have not done that specific search, but I have yet to go to a school where they don't have a copy. In fact, I was researching a book on ghosts, which I swore I was never going to do, but I did. And I went to San Diego to do some school visits and to visit some haunted places. And I said, "Where's your Tales of the Cryptids?" to the librarian. She said, "Oh, I don't want you to see that." And I said, "I want to see it." She said, "No, it's terrible. I so don't want you to see that." I said, "Let me see that book." And she brought it out and it was just dog-eared and ripped. And she says, "Don't look at the cryptid dictionary," which is a little section in the back that says more cryptids. And cryptozoology, cryptids are mysterious animals. So I said, "Let me see." So I went back to the back, and there in the back of this picture book, which looks like this.
Yeah.
So you go back to the cryptid dictionary, which is back here, and it looks like this.
Yeah.
And do you see the edges of the pages there?
Yeah.
How they're pristine and white and lovely? They weren't pristine and white and lovely on her copy. They had Cheeto stains on every page. So here's my delighted heart thinking of this kid laying on the floor with a bowl of Cheetos,
Yes.
reading, and he's making Cheeto stains. Every page had oily orange Cheeto stains. Had to be Cheetos, maybe Doritos, but anyway. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I understand why you don't have this out, but can I trade you this book for a brand new copy?" And she said, "Are you crazy?" And I said, "Yes, but that's beyond the point." And I said to her, I said, "You know, a lot of my books don't win awards, but that's because I don't write for awards. I write for kids. And that book with the Cheeto stains is my reward. That's my award." And it's just such a delight. It's been wonderful to write things that kids just can't get enough of.
I love that story because that's every writer wants their books to be read. You don't want them sitting pristine in a bookshelf, not having ever been have the pages turned. So that's a great story. Well, now to shift gears a little bit, when you consider yourself writing for elementary, and clearly the theme is the weird, do you have some favorite elementary books that you wish more schools had, or that you always talk about when you go to school visits? So what's your elementary highlights?
Well, Tales of the Cryptids, it's been in print for 18 years. So that's the favorite, and that's my soul book. And when I started writing it, I thought I was going to prove all those animals were fake. That was my plan, because I thought people were lying to kids and you shouldn't do that. And then little by little, as I did the deep research, not the surface research, I realized some are real, some are fake, but most of them are maybes. And if I couldn't prove it was fake, I didn't tell the kids it was fake. That would be a lie.
Yeah.
I gave them evidence for and against. And that's that critical thinking piece that we all need so desperately, especially right now. I mean, a lot of Americans have forgotten that we need to be critical thinkers. We need to weigh the evidence. We need to weigh the sources of the evidence.
Yeah.
And so the books that I write, the weird books that I write, give us an opportunity to use something fun like Bigfoot to say, okay, let's look for the evidence. What do we have? Where do we go on the spectrum? And as you do that research, you learn what's reliable and what isn't. And it's really super important. I remember for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years when I went to school visits, because I'm the weird lady, the kids feel free, and middle schoolers especially, they're super interested. They want to ask questions that they get made fun of for at home.
Yeah.
And for about 7 years, kids were saying, "Is Slender Man real?" And the first time they asked me, I said, "I don't know. Let me go do some research and I'll get back to you." So I did the research for Slender Man. And I realized that he came from a site called Creepypasta, which is a fictional website where kids can go and put their fiction in. It was a wonderful, scary, Slender Man. If you killed in his name, you might get to live in his mansion with him. And it was, so I was able to go back to the kids, and when they said, is he real? And I said, no, but he's really good fiction. And there's a place for that too.
Yeah.
And there's a video game and there are movies, and it has exploded. But these kids couldn't ask anybody because they would say, oh, that's stupid. Let's get on with things. So
I love that. The teacher in me is thinking, after a presentation by you where you say, is it or isn't it? You know, that's the perfect opportunity for kids to say, well, which side do you weigh in on, right? Do you
on
do you
any
lean
topic.
this way or that way?
Well, and the thing with Slender Man, those little girls in Wisconsin who took their friend into the woods and stabbed her many times because they wanted to live with Slender Man. Don't you think they needed to be able to ask that question?
Yeah.
And to have someone take them
Conversation with
seriously?
somebody, right? Yeah.
Your mom and dad should have said, when you go home and say, is Slender Man real, Mom? I don't know. Let's look him up. Let's see. Let's go together. We're going to go together to the internet, which can be a scary place, and we're going to do the critical thinking research. And then maybe those little girls wouldn't have made that choice. Maybe they would have realized this is not real. And even if it is real, it is not nice to attack your friend in the woods. Yeah. So I think we need to give kids a place to ask the weird questions. And, you know, I was certain Bigfoot was fake, and now I'm not sure he's fake. I think he might be out there.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things to say, what is it we don't quite know about this, right? Yeah. I think there's certainly room for more explanation and more exploration, right, to go on. And that's good for kids, to give them that opportunity to explore what's out there. So when you go to a school visit, do you read to the kids, and so what's your approach at an elementary school level?
You know, when I first started in school visits, I'm really good friends with a young adult novelist named Chris Crutcher. And I had seen him present many times. And he said, if you want to be a good school presenter, you need to watch other people. So I started asking every writer I knew, can I watch you do one? Can I go when you go to a school? So I watched, and Chris said, steal things. He says, you're not going to do it my way, but you can take something you learn from me and apply it to what you do. Yeah. And I remember watching Crutcher and thinking, Crutcher, he feels like he's your friend. And every kid feels that way from him. And I thought, he and I have that in common, in that approachability sort of thing. So I thought, and the difference between Chris and I is that I thought, because I'm sometimes presenting for younger kids and even middle schoolers in this vein, I want to tell them what the kid I was. I want to show them the little girl whose mother wanted her to wear dresses all the time. Well, I grew up in Texas where girls had to wear dresses all the time. We were not allowed to wear jeans in school. Yeah. But she wanted to be a girly girl like my big sister. And that was never, ever going to happen. And so I introduced this weird little girl who likes catching frogs better than wearing dresses. And then we go through to how that weird little girl never changed. And it's that weird little girl who tells me what to write next. And
very good.
And you get to honor who you are. And that I tell them I'm weird. I get paid for being weird. And I know I can pick, there's me, and there's me, and there's me. I know the kids who were the me. Yeah. But then there's the cheerleader, and there's the football captain, and there's the student body president. You can see them. And it's the student body president that comes up to me and says, my family's really weird too. Yeah. And you start to realize that we're more alike than we are different if we just felt safe. And when I go to a school, I say, I'm weird and I love it. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. And they start to see it a little differently. And if we take the power out of the hateful words, like, oh, you're weird. And I tell the kids, when somebody tells me I'm weird, I say, thank you, because that pays my bills. So it gives them not just, if you're LGBTQ, if you're this, if you're that, if you're, you know, when one person stands up and says, yeah, I'm different, but that's okay, then they can take that concept and plug it in.
And I think
their particular difference.
Yeah, and I think elementary age kids are more aware of that than we give them credit for. I think that often kids see the world as an equal playing field, I think it's adults that tell them it isn't. They say it's adults that tell them they can't be friends with this kid or that kid because of where they live or what race they happen to be. In fact, I just finished a really good adult novel by Dennis Lehan that's set in the summer just before in Boston before they integrate the schools, right? And he points to the fact that I hadn't known that they take a poor black neighborhood and the poor Southie white neighborhood, and they force them to integrate. It's not the upper middle class and wealthy that are being integrated. All this grand experiment is put in a neighborhood where it's very difficult, right? They already feel
Yeah.
oppositional. And one of the characters in the book is making that point that we're lying to our children. We tell them over and over again until they embrace the lie that this is what life is. Life is only like it is here in Southie, or life is only like it is here in the black neighborhood. And I think that's really telling, right? That kids kind of know we're lying to them until we get them to embrace whatever the lie is, right?
Or even explore what truth means.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I see that all the time. But that's fantastic that you do that with kids. Um, and we'll run at the beginning, at the end of this interview, a series of your book covers so that people can see the things you're dealing with, and we'll have links, of course, to your website. So let's move to a little bit more to my audience, although I think my audience, young adults, should be reading children's books and reading these things, but closer to what do you see as your middle grade reference points? And what would you point to and say, okay, if I have to say I'm a middle grade writer, these are the books that I would point to?
Well, my sweet spot is 10 and up. And a lot of times they try to put that into 8 to 10 or 8 to 12, which is silly because really it's 10 and up.
Yeah.
So most of my picture books, whether it's Saving the Baghdad Zoo or Tales of the Cryptids or Death Eaters, which is about scavengers,
Yeah.
they all have a really high appeal for middle grade libraries. And it's funny because I thought I didn't want to do middle grades because I went to 4 different middle schools. My father worked for IBM, so we moved a lot. And I thought middle school was terrifying. And it sort of carried over into my adulthood until I went to Pennsylvania and I did some school visits, and we pulled into this school and it said middle school. And I said, "This is a middle school?" And she said, "Yeah." Apparently my terror was on my face. She said, "Is that a problem?" I said, "Oh no, it'll be fine." And I thought, well, all I have is what I have. So I'm gonna see what happens. They might eat me for lunch, but we'll see. So I was up on a stage in this big auditorium with all these middle schoolers, and I was terrified. But I thought, no, I'm just gonna do what I do and we'll see what happens. And those kids loved me. And I thought, I've been afraid of middle school all this time because I was a middle schooler. But now I'm confident of being this weird old lady. And as long as I'm confident, they're fine. And they want to have a chance to express who they are, whatever that turns out to be. And it's like anything else, me or Chris or you or anybody else who tries to reach out to kids, if you can give them the tools to love who they are and love what they love, then you're going to be on the same team. Yeah. So I realized that I had been missing the boat with middle schoolers, and I love middle schoolers now. I'm glad I'm not a teacher for middle schoolers because those hormones would be really hard for me to help with. But I do love the kids, and they're bigger than elementary school kids, but they're not that much different. Elementary school kids will guffaw. That's so funny. Where middle school kids will go, huh. But if I get a that's a true and honest, huh, and I know I did okay. So middle schoolers, even though some of my books look younger, I studied journalism in college, and when I write a nonfiction picture book, it's written exactly the same way I wrote for newspapers, adult publications. I will just stop and define a more complicated word. So if you pick up any of my books, even though they look like they're for elementary school, they are absolutely find for middle schools.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. That's really good advice because I'm remembering that one of the best things I learned is that during adolescence, a kid's really focused attention span for most kids is about equal to their age. So I'm telling teachers, I say, well, you're trying to get a sophomore to pay attention to something for 30 minutes without a break or a change, in what you're talking about or what you've asked them to do. And I think of the really well written um, books that are especially informative, where they're breaking into pieces and they have chapters. Middle school kids are diving right into that stuff because they can take the pace that they want, they can do the exploration. So I think you're exactly right that I
Well,
love
and they're
your
not as intimidating as longer books. Longer books, the
absolutely.
minute you pick up a longer book, there's a little party that goes, can I do this? Even as an adult, and I reviewed millions of adult books for newspapers all over the country, and I would get a book and I would think, oh my gosh, because adult writers tend to be a little bit indulgent and they don't cut to the chase very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it can be intimidating. So if you have some picture books in the middle school library, that the kids may not carry them around because they look young, but they will sit down and read it if it's a topic that interests them. So if it's about cryptozoology or Bigfoot or ghosts or a zoo that they saved in Iraq, those are all things that are interesting. So they can sit there and read it. And that might inspire them to read something a little more complicated. If you read a book, Saving the Baghdad Zoo, which has 68 pages, something like that, with lots of pictures, and you find it interesting, you may then have the confidence to pick up the novel length nonfiction,
Yeah.
and
I'm
say,
sure
but
that
I've got a foundation for this now. I can have the courage to tackle it. So I think there's a place in middle school libraries for books that look as if they're written for younger people, but you just have to pick the writers that understand.
yeah, I think we're talking about something that, Terry Lassane would call reading ladders, when she wrote, that if you get a kid to find a book about dinosaurs at this level and they can read it really quickly and then they get the next level and then the next level, well, then maybe they're reading Jurassic Park in a few weeks, right? And they're reading
Exactly.
something they never imagined that they would read, but the picture book got their interest and they move forward, right?
Well, it's not as if we don't have a format for this. It's everything we do in life, whether it's learning
Yeah.
to walk or learning to eat hard food or whatever. It's line upon line, precept on precept. And so, uh, you know, if we understand that we build confidence in levels, then having picture books in middle school is a no-brainer. As long as you pick the books that are, high interest to kids.
Yeah. I think there's I remember a kid once that was a sophomore, and it was in the early days when PowerPoints and we had computer labs, right? Or that we had the computers that could come to the classroom. Certainly not everyone had them, and so I had an assignment where they had to do a PowerPoint presentation on something that interested them, and it was limited. It had to be 10 slides, and we're learning. And I had this kid who really didn't do many assignments, who all of a sudden was doing a great job, and he did it on peppers, like jalapeno peppers. And I said, why is that interesting? He says, well, it's not interesting to me, but I found a really good GIF of a dancing pepper that I could use in the corner of every PowerPoint. And so
Inspiration.
the fact that he found this little GIF, then he said, well, then I'll do my whole thing so he could show us how he had an animated portion of his PowerPoint, which very few of them had, right? He'd found an animation that he could incorporate, and so he constructed this PowerPoint on various peppers, and it was really good. And I thought, the thing you're doing is giving yourself away. You're showing everyone that you're really bright, you're really intelligent, and what we've probably been
And he
doing
got
is
a taste of
boring you.
success, right? He
Yeah,
got to feel successful because he did something that other people responded to. It's funny because when I talk about research and I tell them I like weird stuff, so this is what I do, but you can research anything. And one middle schooler came to me once after a presentation and he said, do you mean I can research black holes if I want? And I said, what's stopping you? Doesn't have to be homework to do research. And he was like, yes. Like he'd never realized that he could research things on his own, that he didn't have to be write a report about a president.
Yeah.
It can be what you love. So, and what you love is up to you. Nobody can tell you
Yeah.
don't do it.
Yeah, if it's the
They can
dance that
try, but it's
shepherd
not going to
does,
work.
let's go for it. That's great. Yeah, so I think that one of the things that I tell parents, and um, and I'm getting to the age where I have nieces and nephews who have kids in elementary school, and they say, "Well, what should they be reading in middle school?" And I said, "Just go to the library and with them and let them explore." It's really hard for me to tell you what they should be reading because I don't know, are they interested in fantasy or science fiction or history, or I can't. If I could spend a couple hours with your kid in the library, I could tell you what I would suggest. But just because I'm an expert in young adult literature doesn't mean I have at the ready books for kids to read. If you say, "Oh, my kid reads fantasy," then I will say, "Oh, maybe read this." If your kid reads sports books, then maybe you drift here. But it's really hard when the answer might be take your kid to the library and let them explore and see what they like and see what you like and see what you like together.
Let's
And
underscore that, see what they like. Why don't we help our kids fall in love with reading first,
yeah,
with whatever they love to read, and then they'll graduate. My sister called me once and said her daughter Deandra was just absorbing Goosebumps, and she said, I can't get her to stop reading Goosebumps. And I said, why would you want to? And she said, because they're not serious. And I said, trust me, let her cut her teeth on Goosebumps and watch what happens. And Deandra went from Goosebumps one leap to Redwall.
yeah,
And anybody who doesn't know who Redwall, look them up because they're fantastic. A writer named Brian Jakes, but they're like 300 pages.
yeah,
And they're complex, and they're so Deandra got her confidence through reading 10 million Goosebumps books. And she had her own bookshelf and she had millions of them. And then she made the leap based on that confidence
yeah,
to something a lot more sophisticated.
yeah.
So if we help
It's
our kids
really,
to fall in love with whatever they love,
yeah.
then they will make the leap.
It's great. And I for a while I was in. We lived in Tucson, Arizona when I was in middle school for a while, and sixth grade and seventh grade. Sixth grade, we still got to go to the public library on a field trip like once a month, and we were all in the children's section, fifth or sixth grade. And the teacher took a couple of us and said, "I know you've been reading some biographies. Did you know there's a biography section over here?" Because I'd been reading tons of elementary level biographies, more than I could probably hang my hat on, right? And I remember reading an elementary biography on General Custer, right? And it's one I just finished. And he said, there's other biographies. And he showed me where they were. And I found this biography that is, several hundred pages, 500 or 600 pages on Armstrong, General Custer, George Armstrong Custer. And I checked that out. And all of a sudden I'm reading at a completely different level, right? Um, but the teacher had to be smart enough to look around and point kids and see which ones needed to be over here or over there so we could find more stuff. He didn't tell me what to look for. He just told me it was okay to go here as
And
opposed
pointed
to
you in
over
the right
here.
direction. And that's the magic of a teacher. I'm good at keeping kids interested for a day. But if I was a teacher, I'd teach them how to play. And somehow or other, our educators, our teachers, including our teacher librarians, they were endowed with a magical power of how to actually see the kids and to really see them and to guide them in ways that don't feel overwhelming. They don't feel forced. They feel suggested. I mean, my oldest daughter was a very stubborn child, and I'd say, put these pants on, put these pants on. And it was always a battle to get her dressed in the morning until I finally figured out she wants a choice. And so when I started saying, do you want to wear the red pants or the blue pants? Ooh, I'll wear the red pants, because she wanted to feel empowered.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that teachers have, is the ability to gently watch and figure out what makes each kid tick, which is mind-boggling in its challenge, and then to gently give them choices so that they feel empowered, because that empowerment is going to carry them through for the rest of their life. And reading is an empowering thing. knowing that you can read. If you like Bigfoot, there's not a sin in that. That's okay. And now Bigfoot's huge. But when I first wrote about Bigfoot, yeah, for young readers, it didn't exist.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit risky. But
Yeah, well,
if they know,
I think you've made some good choices along the way, and I hope you keep writing as long as you want to and providing things. But as I was doing this series of having conversations with authors, I thought I'm going to invite a few of the elementary writers that I think are doing really interesting stuff and see if they want to participate and sprinkle those throughout the year. So thank you, Kelly, for being my first elementary writer to be in the in the in the realm of this. Although I got to say, I've interviewed Catherine Erskine, who has a couple of elementary level books, and we highlighted one that she just did with Keith Henry Brown called My Dad is a DJ. And that was fun to talk to them about the production of that elementary book. But it's been great to talk with you.
well, thank you so much for having me. It's been great fun.
Good. Appreciate it. And we'll see you down the road.
Okay, take care.